The public hearing is a proposed text amendment. This proposed text amendment will amend Chapter 19 zoning of City Code as part of the effort to facilitate the implementation recommendations of the strategic plan delivered to the city in November of 2020. And Todd, I believe you're going to start off the discussion for this public hearing. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. To offer a brief overview, this strategic plan ordinance number 1 came out of a meeting with City Council on November 23rd of 2020, and it was invoked under the pending ordinance doctrine in an effort to provide the City and Council time to distill the recommendations of the strategic plan. And then on March 16th, the matter was remanded by Council with revisions from the Clemson Next Implementation Committee to the Planning Commission for a recommendation. The PC took up that matter and recommended approval with a 6-1 vote with the recommendation that the Council establish a timeline associated with the ordinance. The dissenting vote that night was from Mr. Clark, who had concerns about the ordinance being adopted as a temporary measure. On April 20th, Council and the Planning Commission held a joint workshop to work through further details of the ordinance, and then that resulted in a revised version being brought back to the Planning Commission for a vote on May 10th. And at that time, it passed 5-2. With the dissenting votes again from Mr. Clark, who that night could not hear due to technical difficulties, and from Mr. Arnold, who felt like the language was just not clear. This was then brought before Council on May 17th for a public hearing and a first reading. The public hearing was held that night, but Council did not have a first reading of the ordinance that night. On June the 7th, this was then presented to Council for a vote, and there was a fair amount of public comment that night, and that prompted Council to consider sending this back to the Planning Commission and asking their opinion on removing a minimum acreage requirement for a planned development. And so that was sent back to the Planning Commission, and they weighed in on that a week ago tonight, on the 29th, at a special call meeting. They voted 3-2. We had 2 members absent that night, but the 5 voting members who were there voted 3-2 to advance the ordinance with language that reads that there is no minimum acreage requirement for a planned development located in commercially zoned districts. A PD must be a minimum of 4 contiguous acres when located in or joined solely by R20 or R12. And a PD in all other zoning districts must be a minimum of 2 contiguous acres. So the language about the 4 acres surrounded by R20 and 12, that's currently the language in the ordinance. But their interpretation from dialogue with the Council and their own opinions was that the primary objective was to remove the minimum acreage from commercially zoned districts only, and that's what they did. The dissenting votes that night focused on several issues. There were comments during the public session of the special call meeting where members of the public expressed concerns that the Planning Commission, or members of the Planning Commission, echoed. The 2 dissenting votes that night were from Mr. Arnold and Chairman Green, and the dissenting votes focused on questions as to whether or not a quarter or half-acre lot could meet the legal requirements that the state has placed on a PD, or that the city has placed on a PD. A preference to have zoning that allows projects to move forward under a by right option instead of forcing them into a PD, and that and also the potential of avoiding buildings being side by side with different standards, and other unintended consequences. But they did pass it 3-2, and Chairman Green is here tonight to answer questions on behalf of the Planning Commission, should you have any. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? And well, I didn't check, but did Bob call in?
I messaged back and forth, we're trying to get him to do that. Let's connect.
Okay. Just making sure. Okay. Thank you.
You can tell them over the mic so we can do a call a conference line,
Okay.
and I'll unmute.
All right. So, Bob, if you're listening, Bob Brookover, please call in on the public conference line,
653-986.
653 9886. 65.
Can you all hear me now?
There we go, Bob. Thank you. Want to make sure now I see you up there too on the screen, so thank you. Questions for Todd?
Todd, just to be clear, so what the Planning Commission passed deletes both the 2 contiguous acre requirement and the 4 continuous acres when adjoined by R20 or R12.
They did not delete that. All they deleted.
That is stricken out on the document.
This is how it reads. There is no minimum acreage requirement for a PD located in commercially zoned districts. A PD must be a minimum of 4 contiguous acres when located in or adjoined solely by R20 or R12 districts. A PD in all other zoning districts must be a minimum of 2 contiguous acres. That's the language that the Planning Commission advanced before you, and that's what's posted on the website.
So they left in the 4 contiguous acres adjoined R20 or R12.
That is correct. And then they added a sentence for clarification. Because they removed it from the commercially zoned districts and they had that language about completely surrounded by R20 and 12, they realized that there are PDs in other districts not mentioned, and they said that those would have a minimum of 2 acres. And that would be like R1, 2, 3, and 4.
And so are there PDs in non-commercial areas?
Yes. I mean, each PD is its own zoning district, but there are PDs that are surrounded by residential.
So where this says the PD in all other zoning districts must be removed 2 contiguous acres.
Mm-hmm.
And we've already said that in commercial areas, it doesn't have to be 2 acres. That applies in our districts. There are also PDs. And those would still have to be 2 acres.
Correct. So what they recommended is that for all commercial zones, CP1, 2, CM, and C, that there be no minimum acreage requirement. For those that are surrounded by R20 and R12, there'd be a 4-acre minimum. And you were correct in that all the only other zoning districts we have are the other residential districts are in 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that for those areas, they would need to be 2 acres. That's their recommendation. Yes, Bob?
Bob, yes.
So, Todd, when you read that, you said in or surrounded by R12 and R20. Is that correct?
Yes.
In or adjoined solely by R20 or R12 districts.
So I want to be clear there that does that language mean, because I know that's somewhat status quo, that, for example, let's take Strode Circle that has R20 zoning on Strode Circle, and then directly behind Strode Circle across Knox Lane is commercial. With that language, would it be possible for someone to come in and do a 2-acre or less PD there? Because it is not, I think the previous language was surrounded by or something to that effect, and that R20 is not surrounded by, is not, obviously not all R20. There is commercial property. So what would be the impact or effect on any place in the city where R20 or R12 bumps up against C, as in Strode Circle, Knox Lane, and the College Avenue properties?
If, two things, the language regarding the R20 and R12 is exactly the same. That was left untouched. It was just moved within the ordinance. To your point, it depends on which side of Knox Lane you reside. If you are on the commercial side and you're a commercial property, there is no minimum acreage.
Right. I get that.
And
I
so
want to know what it is in the other direction.
on the other side, if you, as I would interpret this, is that because the last sentence in here, which is also in the original ordinance, is that whatever's happening across the street or alley is contiguous. So it doesn't matter. And so if you are a property owner who has R20 that abuts Knox Lane, and then on to your east and north and south you have R20, but then on your west, on the other side of Knox Lane, you have commercial, it would require a 2-acre minimum, is how I would interpret being presented, because you're not surrounded by R20 or R12. If you go over it deeper into that neighborhood, you would then be surrounded by R20. You'd have to be 4-acre minimum. So if you're on Knox, in that scenario, if you're on the residential side of Knox Lane, then you would have to have a 2-acre minimum. If you're on the commercial side, there would be no minimum. Now, does that answer your question?
Kind of, yes. But so the concern there would be that it would be possible for for someone who owned property on College Avenue, between College Avenue and Knox Lane, to assemble, let's say, 4 lots, which would equal approximately 2 acres on Strode, and include those in a PD that is encroaching into an R20 and R12 neighborhood.
As I interpret the ordinance as is being proposed tonight, that I would agree that if they had 2 acres, they wouldn't have to attach it to anything else. If they had 2 acres that abut commercial, then they could move forward with a request for a PD.
Yeah. But that's status quo to what the language was. But the language actually, Lowell, if that's you, if you could go back up to item A, so I can see that. So the language was the PD must be a minimum of 4 contiguous acres when it joined solely by the R20 or R12 districts. You said in the current language, and I don't have that in front of me, it said in or adjoined by. So within, that means that you would have to have a 4-acre minimum if you were proposing a PD that included R20 or R12 districts.
If it was surrounded by R20 or R12.
Well, the way that you said it, and I don't have it in front of me what you just read from. The language changed from what it has been to in and adjoined by, not just adjoined by, solely by.
Okay, gotcha.
In or adjoined by.
That's correct. It's located in or adjoined solely by.
Okay. So if that happens, then that covers R20 and R12 regardless of where it's located, and what it's next to would need to be 4 acres. If the word in is being inserted into that language. In or.
I think the operative word there, Bob, is in or adjoined solely by. And so,
Right.
again, this will be for the planning commission and council to determine, and, but as it's written, that is how I would interpret it, that it would have to be surrounded by R20 or R12 to have the 4-acre minimum requirement. Otherwise, it would be 2 acres unless it was in commercially zoned property, in which case there's no minimum.
Right. Okay.
Okay?
Other questions?
And again, Mary Beth, and I'm thinking as all are also here from the planning commission, should you have questions for them? Okay?
All right, appreciate it, Tom. Mary, did you want to add anything before?
I'm a little confused with the in or adjoined by solely. It's the word solely that confuses me a little bit. So if I have a piece of property and it touches on a C district and it touches on a, say, a R12, and that would not qualify for the 4-acre requirement, right? It has to be solely surrounded by R.
And I'm going to request that Elaine come to the podium because she was kind of the author of this language, and I want to make sure that.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing it. I
No,
just
no,
want to
no,
understand
no,
it.
I want
Yeah.
to make sure I can explain and justify what the intention behind it
Okay.
was when they added that language. If they were trying to, if it's muddy the waters, then I think having the planning commission's intentions
I agree.
made clear.
Well, I'll tell you, the way I read it as written in the proposed, the published thing was, it must be a minimum of 4 acres when adjoined solely by R12 or R20. And that's what has me a little confused.
Okay, so the original one that came to us said 4 contiguous acres when adjoined solely by R20, R12. We just added located in, which essentially is saying the same thing, so we haven't
Okay.
really changed.
Oh,
that
and I'm
part.
not worried about it, but if it touches on something else, it doesn't have to be 4 acres. Is that right? If it touches on a commercial zone, it doesn't have to be 4 acres.
Right, because it's
Okay.
not located in or solely
Okay.
adjoined by.
Then
And that was
I'm
our-
square.
that was
I just
our-
want to make sure that I was
Thank
clear on
you.
that.
Appreciate it, Elaine, thank you. Any other questions, comments from council? If not, please come up to the podium, make sure you state your name, address, and we do limit, try to keep it at 3 minutes, please.
John Crowley. I live at 111 Gregory Street in Clemson. There's just a couple of notes on this. It's more of a process issue of zoning in general. The main things are this ordinance has the potential to affect over 200 different properties in Clemson. Now, it's kind of downtown and all around town. So what you're looking at, if you do this and it goes forward, is you have the potential to have over 200 different zoning districts with their own regulations or whatever in town. So even if you consider what's already been combined and what's not going to be redeveloped that's other use, you're still looking at possibly 100 future new zoning districts that all have to be sorted out with setbacks and their own regulations and have to be kept up with, which I feel is probably an unnecessary bunch of turmoil and headache for the city to deal with, when I'm sure the council has ideas in mind of what they would like to see as far as residential and commercial. I think it would be an easier process to just add that into the zoning, the current commercial zoning, add whatever restrictions it is, and if somebody wants to go outside of those to get a bigger development or something that may fit, sure, then they can go the PD route. But, I mean, with that in mind, there's already the idea that you guys, for this regular meeting, you're doing a first reading on RM1A, creating a new zoning district. So if a PD is the way to handle this stuff, then why even bother adding that? I mean, just have whoever's applying for a rezoning go through a PD. So if you need to create that to deal with the problem again, why not just amend the current regulations? Then you've also got the three questions that I guess could be summed up in this on how to go forward. I would ask for this. Obviously, you guys have the authority to pass anything to go forward, but ask these questions before you do. I would ask that you ask the planning department how long they think it would take to process 100 potential applications. Because as a property owner right now that has no right to residential development, I want to get my vested interest in, I don't own commercial property now. As a property owner, I would want to get that in to increase my value so that I have a route forward for that before it changes. So you're going to have a flood coming in. How long is that going to take? You guys have 24 regular scheduled meetings a year. How long is it going to take you to do 2 votes, 2 readings on each one of those applications to come through? Third question would be asking the legal department, is any of that going to cause an unnecessary delay that could create a potential liability for the city? And those would be the three questions I would ask you to consider before moving forward with this, because I really do feel like this is kind of just a congested way of dealing with a problem.
Oh, sign in, actually. Sign in, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. It's to your right.
No problem.
I just want to make
Thank
you walk
you.
around the whole room. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Next. Anyone here would like to speak? If not, we got to call Lowell D. Oh, yes, sir.
Sign first.
No, either one. Just don't forget to sign. Appreciate it.
I'm Ken Gosnell. I have an office on 120 Stewart Circle. I've been there about 12 years, about 20 years in the city here. You know, most of the business owners all have different goals for their properties. You know, we've invested a lot of time in building a business and serving the community. And there's the other side of considering what to do for retirement. My wife and I have talked about the possibility of moving back into my office when I retire. Whether that's just upgrading what I have now or knocking it down and rebuilding. You know, we talked about that as well. And in the light of a CM district, you know, having continuing, I'm a chiropractor, continuing my physical therapy business, and maybe having a loft apartment. You know, that's kind of how it was designed to be in that area. I passed on several offers over the years, really good offers, because I like its individual units. And some people worry about having diversity, but you know that's kind of sometimes diversity is not always a bad thing. Of having a little bit of different looks in the area as well. We talk about unexpected consequences, and you know there's definitely a devaluation with the scenario here. And one thing I want you to think about is there's going to be less interest in a lot of the properties with some of these new changes. And I feel like you're going to have less upgrades. You have a lot of properties that are empty right now. They're going to be empty for a lot longer. Or they're not going to be attracting some businesses that might not want to necessarily they're not going to really know what's going to happen down the road. But looking at it as an individual house, it's hard for me to explain to my wife that maybe we can, maybe we can't after we've invested all this time and effort into the place, but I have to have someone else give me permission on whether that's a consideration of what we can do. Also, I'm sorry I wasn't here last time, but I did listen to the conversations, and it just looks like that we're kind of jumping into a decision quickly because there was a lot of confusion about the rules, regulations, the effects in the area. But it looks like it's just really jumping to the decision to handcuff the whole business districts completely. And really without a plan on where to go from there. As far as plan, okay, so now we have total control. Now what's our vision? And, really without even pulling the impact and resources of the business owners of the community who really had a big impact in this community today. So, I appreciate what you do and a lot of big decisions, but I really ask that you consider voting no for this situation here.
All right, I'm going to go to caller 7594. 7594, last four digits.
No comment.
No comment? Okay. All right. Just want to make sure. Thank you. Other comments?
John McIntyre, 202 Red Maple Way. Thank you for the opportunity, Mayor, Council members, for this discussion here. As a property owner in the commercial districts, and all the parcels that families associate with, they're all less than 2 acres. Matter of fact, the smallest piece is probably 1/10 of an acre or 2/10 of an acre. To go through the PD as this ordinance is proposing, it's going to be very timely and expensive to do so. Assuming there's going to be a change, and I think it was mentioned earlier, there's numerous properties in the commercial district that are less than 2 acres, and it's put undue burden on those property owners. I guess the last thing I was going to mention real quick is I highly recommend go back and read the city's attorney's notes on this ordinance as written. I think there's still lots of confusion with it, and I think the primary objective here on mine end, I understand where we're going on multifamily housing, but I think we're mixing in mixed-use property with that by eliminating mixed use. Other than going through a PD is problematic. So I think I really need to review this ordinance again, listen to the city attorney, what she's recommending, proposing, and I think we all want to come out with a good proposal here moving forward. Thank you.
I'm Kevin Collins, live at Patrick Square, also have property in downtown Clemson. I'm just curious, and what I would ask City Council to consider is, having been in front of most of you City Council members for the last 4 to 5 years, we've proposed multiple plan developments. We've brought to the table, we've done workshops, and we were told no. And so we submitted a straight zoning project, and we were told no. My question is, as a property owner, as their question I think they're concerned about, is if you guys vote straight plan development, I want to be able to approve that and look at that, what guarantee citizens that you're actually going to do anything other than push the can down the road? Because it's apparent we've worked with the city and tried to work with the city council for over 4 years. And the one thing I've learned in 4 years is extremely difficult. We've literally been over backwards to do it. So I have a major concern as a property owner that all this is going to do is push the can down the road. So, thanks.
comments? No, I assume there's no callers. Okay, thank you. If not, it's 6 o'clock. We'll give it till 6:10. Any other comments from council? Bob? Okay.
Good evening. My name's Dave Johnson from 206 Island View in Seneca, commercial property owner here in the city. I want to thank you guys for your service. I know you guys have a really tough job. For some of us property owners, we're actually quite fearful of what's planned. Your decision could have great economic consequences for us. In addition to that, I think there are a lot of unintended consequences that I've discussed a few times before. And even in the Planning Commission, they were really concerned about the unintended consequences. I think you have a split Planning Commission recommendation, 3-2 vote. A lot of times the boards that I've been on, we'd really want to maybe drill down a little further before we took up an action that was so divided, coming from a very divisive vote. I think if there was even a little more rigorous debate and discussion, I think it was possible that that vote may have been different. And there were also 2 members that weren't even voting at that time. But I kind of want to just briefly go back to, I'm not sure how we got here, because I wanted to read just a few of the comments that the attorney made in the staff report. This is a direct quote. The proposed ordinance was never intended to be implemented longer than a few months necessary for council to do the work. And that's referring to quickly identifying the appropriate overlay and catalyst areas and creating applied standards for those areas. I don't know that that work's been done. 2, quote, the new proposal is of concern because requiring that all residential developments in commercial districts be PDs may illegally exceed the authority provided to local governments by the Enabling Act. That's a danger zone. Why are we requiring every property owner to enter into a contract with the city? Quote, this would seem to be inherently unfair, as the nature of the resulting sets of rules would rest on the relative ability of property owners to afford to pay for PD project design and negotiation. It's an extremely difficult process. It's extremely costly. And as Kevin mentioned, 4 years, can't get an answer. Lastly, the city cannot exceed the authority provided by the Enabling Act. Thus, it cannot change the definition of PDs as set forth in the Act. In other words, if a property owner, say with a smaller parcel, wishes to create a mixed-use residential development, the city cannot force that development to be a PD if the project cannot meet the state law requirements for PDs. So I would say your attorney has given you several reasons why this is not a good idea.
Mr. Johnson, if you'd sign it, yeah. Thank you, yes. Yes, sir. Okay, like I was saying, unless there's other comments, we'll end this at 6:10. It's 6:06 right now. So, any other comments? Lola, assume Bob's still on. No. I can't see it. So. No, I mean, it's fine. I was just joking. Thank you. You're good. Thank you. Unless anybody else has any comments, I'm going to end it a little bit earlier. I said 6:10, but I want to make sure the callers, that's the one I'm concerned about, is that. So I'll stick with what I said. Okay, it's 6:10. Unless there's no other comments, last chance. If not, we'll close this public